Okay, so we're looking at our handout. This is from last time. We are looking at our handout. It's called Lesson 4.2. It's called Exploration, Causes, and Events. And one of the things that we're going to be able to answer at the end of our class time today is what were the causes and effects of state-sponsored expansion of maritime exploration? When we talk about like state sponsored, we're meaning like it's like really expensive to sail around the world, and you have to have a government to help pay for that. In fact, yesterday we identified one guy, a guy from Portugal, who helped pay for exploration of Africa. Who is that one guy?
Henry the Navigator.
Henry the Navigator. Very good. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that kind of stuff right now. But first of all, I want to talk about this issue with trade. Switching PowerPoints, my apologies. But when we look at issue of trade, there's a couple of things that are worth considering, and that is the fact that Europeans had long wanted to trade and interact with, uh, they had long wanted to trade and interact with the rest of the world. And the thing is that one of the nations that had benefited from trade was Italy. So if you look at the map here, Italy is this peninsula that sticks out right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And they're actually like really well suited to be middlemen with the Muslim world because Muslims at this time control like all this part of Europe right here. All this part of Europe is controlled by Muslims. All the Middle East controlled by Muslims. And Italians are going to make a ridiculous amount of money because we said every time there's a middleman, what happens to prices?
They rise.
They rise, exactly. So we're going to write down on the second line, due to its location, this European nation had a monopoly with Muslim middlemen and also made rich profit. We'll write down Italy. Italy. So if Italy is in this situation where they're making a lot of money, on the opposite end of Europe are these two countries here. This is Spain and Portugal. And Spain and Portugal, they don't want to be like left out. They want these Asian products, but they don't want those high prices. So they decide, you know what, it'd be better instead of us paying these prices to the Italians, we don't want to buy sugar, we don't want to buy tea and make the Italians rich. What if we got in our boats? I mean, we're already as far west as possible. And what if we try to, I don't know, like sail around Africa and get to India ourselves? And that's exactly what they're going to try to do. So it says on the next line that they wanted to avoid higher prices. Wanting to avoid higher prices, Western European nations wanted to find new routes to Asia. They wanted to find new routes to Asia. They wanted to avoid higher prices, so Western European nations wanted to find new routes to Asia. And that's why Spain and Portugal are going to look around the western part of their map. They're looking for a better, a faster, a sea-based route to get to Asia. And it says that they are not just doing it for profits, like for money, but they also want to spread, you'll write down Christianity. Because the thing about Christianity, Christianity has this belief that if you're not on Team Jesus, what happens to you when you die? Yeah, you go to hell, right? And they like really believe in that. And if there's a real heaven and a real hell, it would probably make sense for me to try to spread this religion. So that's the second reason why they go out sailing. Now, the guy that we think about most when we think about exploration and the New World is Chris Columbus, right? And there's good reason to talk about Chris Columbus. When we look at Christopher Columbus, a lot of times we think about Chris. Here's Chris. We say things like, "Oh, he discovered America." We say, or we say Chris Columbus. People say this a lot, like in elementary school, that he wanted to prove that the world was round. But the truth is, people already knew the world was round. In fact, this is a globe. This is a globe of the world before Christopher Columbus. So when Christopher Columbus was alive, not a single person believed the world was flat. Like sometimes you hear that growing up, but that's actually just not true. Nobody thought the world was flat. They even have artwork that goes back way before Christopher Columbus. That's the globe. That's like the Earth. So it's not that Chris Columbus was going to prove the Earth was round. Everybody knew that. And if you've ever been taught that, that's actually just not true. It wasn't a thing that people believed. People knew the world was round. And because Chris knew the world was round, he figured incorrectly that if I just sail west from Spain, I bet I can make it to Asia pretty quickly because he didn't know there was a North and a South America there. Even when Chris Columbus made it to the Americas, he made it to all these islands, and he figured, wow, I don't know exactly where I am, but I'm pretty sure these are those islands in Asia. Because like if you look at a map of Asia, there's like all those islands like Indonesia and the Philippines and all those things. So he wasn't really sure, but he knew, oh, there's brown people here. Uh, Indians are brown. I'm pretty sure these people are Indians, right? So Chris Columbus, sadly for him, he actually went to America 4 times, and he never knew he was in a brand new place. He died thinking he was in Asia. He had no idea he had discovered a brand new place. So it says on the handout that Chris Columbus was not the first person even to the Americas. In fact, who were the first people to the Americas?
The natives.
Yeah, we'll write down Native Americans. So even though Chris Columbus, sometimes we mistakenly say, oh, he's famous, he's important because he discovered America. Well, if you ever go somewhere and there's people waving at you from the beach, you didn't discover that place. They did, right? So the very first people who discovered America were the Native Americans. And we talked about this briefly the other day, I think. How did the Native Americans get there? They came from Russia, right? They came from like modern day Russia. They came from Asia. How did they get to Alaska, though? Because what separates Alaska from Russia today, right now? Yeah, there's like the Bering Strait. There's water separating. You can't like drive your car from Alaska to Russia. So how did like these Native Americans, how did they cross from Russia into Alaska?
Boats.
No, they didn't have boats. They walked. How? Yeah, there was an ice age, and at that time, the water levels of the sea were actually lower, and there was what's called a land bridge. You could walk from Russia to Alaska. But after the ice age, the level of the sea actually rose, and that land bridge was now underwater. And that meant thousands of Asians that crossed over into Alaska, thousands of Asians that came to Canada, they're now stuck, and there was no way for them to go back home. So all Native Americans are actually distantly related to East Asians. We could actually take DNA testing and we could like see the similarity of their DNA. We can see also linguistic similarities like their languages and also even their beliefs. So all Native Americans originally were from Asia. So even these Asians came to America and saw America was like a land of hope. They followed the deer across the Bering Strait for a reason. Like they thought Asia's great, but there's hope for a better life in America, even if they never called it America. So those were the first people ever to North and South America, those Native Americans. Who, though, and then it says on the next line that he wasn't even the first white person to America. In fact, he was beat by about 500 years by another group of people who beat him to the Americas.
Is that one church? No, it's not.
No.
Is that one church?
The Vikings. Like, you might remember that the Vikings, they came from Scandinavia. It's off the map here. But then they went to Iceland, and then they went to, this is actually Greenland, and then they came to Canada. So we're going to write down the Vikings on the next line. And the Vikings, they did live in Canada, but you know what? They never like intermarried. They never like stayed. Actually, when that ice, there was another time period called the Little Ice Age. When it got too cold, you know what they did? They bailed on Canada. So that's why we don't have like Viking Day, you know, we have like Columbus Day or whatever. We don't have Columbus Day because Chris was a good guy. We have Columbus Day because he like changed the world forever. Because now we have white people in America. We have black people in America. We have all these different cultures and foods and plants. Everything's like mixed because of Christopher Columbus. The Vikings left. They never intermarried. They never stayed around. And so they didn't make a long-term impact. And that's why on the next line it says, Christopher Columbus was the first European to open constant contact between the old world and the new world. That's why we celebrate Columbus Day. He opened constant contact between the old world and the new world. After Chris, there was no going back. There was no going back. White Europeans would come, and they'd bring their culture, their ways, and conquest with them.
Wasn't he a really bad dude?
Well, Christopher Columbus was very much a person of his time. Like at this time, violence and conquest were common. And sadly, when Chris came to the Americas, he had good things and he had some pretty terrible things too. And so there's evidence he overlooked rape, that he had some violent,
Smash babies' heads against.
I don't know about that, but definitely he did what many people at this time generally did. So we don't celebrate him and his personal moral conduct if we choose to celebrate him. We celebrate the fact that he started something that changed the world forever. Like we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but we don't celebrate that because like, oh, he like cheated on his wife several times. Let's celebrate that guy. Like that's not what we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. We celebrate him for like what he did great, which was like civil rights. And for acknowledging Columbus, we're not saying like he's a great guy because of his personal conduct toward natives. He's a great person in that he did something great. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean for the first time and started constant contact, and that changed the world forever. It says on the handout, on the next side, that European nations were actually in rivalry. They competed on the handout for exploration and eventually colonies. These rival nations competed for exploration and eventually colonies. That's what the European nations did. Because if you look at a map of Europe, they're all like kind of small, and they're all kind of competing, they're all kind of fighting, and that actually makes them better because they're trying to like beat out the guy next to them. And it says on the handout that exploration was actually expensive, and without state support, it could not have been possible. It could not have been possible. Without state support, they would not have been possible. Like you cannot afford these boats and these expeditions without like, the government paying for it. Like when we decided to go to the moon, who paid for the United States going to the moon? The government did, like NASA paid for it. Because at that time, there was no billionaire who could do that. Now today, billionaires, we mentioned the other day, they're getting involved with the space race or, going to space. But at first, there was no one on Earth had that kind of money. So the government said, we'll do it. Well, at this time, no one has that money on their own to go to try to make it to Asia. So government gets involved. It says on the handout that Columbus was eventually sponsored by the King and Queen of Spain. He'd actually asked other countries. He like went to Portugal twice and said, hey, man, will you give us money? It's my idea. And the King of Portugal said, no, it's a stupid idea. It'll never work. So he asked other people. He got turned down again and again and again, but he was super persistent. He asked the King and Queen of Spain, and they said, yes. You should probably know what their name is. I think pretty much other classes were able to identify them. King and Queen of Spain? Say it?
Isabella Ferdinand.
Yeah, this is Ferdinand and Isabella. So, I don't know. We'll write down Ferdinand and Isabella. That was the King and Queen of Spain, and they actually give Columbus the cash he needs to make this thing happen. And because Ferdinand and Isabella are super religious, they have another reason for supporting this expedition. It says on the handout, they also wanted to spread their preferred version of Christianity. Because they were Catholic, and they were like super serious about the Catholic faith. In fact, something else happened in 1492, other than Chris sailing the ocean blue. What else happened in 1492 in Spain? It's like a big deal. Someone was kicked out of Spain in 1492. The last of these were kicked out of Spain in 1492. Muslims, like you might remember, Muslims had ruled Spain. Well, Ferdinand and Isabella were the two in charge, and they were the ones in charge when the last Muslims were kicked out of 1492. So they were super Catholic. Like they're like, hey, if you're not Catholic, get the heck out of Spain. And so they were super into that. It says on the handout, eventually European countries embrace an economic theory. This is a bit of a funny word. I'm going to say and spell it, and then I'm going to explain it and then help you fill in the blanks. What they embraced was something called mercantilism. I'll go ahead and spell that for you if you don't know. Mercantilism is MERCANTILISM. So let me explain mercantilism to you, and then after I explain it to you, I'm going to help you fill in the blanks. So mercantilism is a philosophy that talks about why we have colonies. How many colonies, British colonies, were there in North America that we come from? 13, right? So we know about the 13 colonies. So in my explanation, Great Britain would be like our mother. Like they Great Britain birthed us. England gave birth to 13 colonies, 13 kids. And whenever you have kids, like you're not in charge. Like you have to do what they say, and like if you do bad, you get disciplined, and etc. And so England has kids, the 13 colonies, 13 kids. And there's things that the 13 colonies are responsible for doing. You know, you have chores or whatever, and we have responsibilities too. So for example, in the South, my responsibility is I'm supposed to like grow various stuff that the mother wants. For example, I can grow cotton, I can grow sugar. And you know what I'm going to do with all that? I mean, what's the biggest thing we make with cotton? Clothes, right? But you actually need factories to make clothes. And if the 13 colonies are new, if the 13 colonies are like in the wilderness, if the 13 colonies are just like barely being developed, are there factories in the 13 colonies?
No.
There's not. So what I want all my colonies to do is I want you to make raw materials, like just cotton. I want you to grow rice. I want you to grow sugar. And guess what you're going to do with all those raw things? You're going to ship it back to the mother country. Now in England, they have factories, and they can actually take the sugar and actually make an alcoholic beverage out of it. You can make something called rum, but we're not going to. We'll make that. We'll make that in England, and we're going to take the cotton and we'll make it into clothes in England. And now that I have all this clothes I've made, who can I sell this finished clothing to that needs clothing?
America.
America. And this gets a little bit more complicated too, because you guys are making cotton for me, and you're my kids, but I tell you that you can only sell it to me. Even if someone knocks on your door, say Spain knocks on your door, or France knocks on your door, or the Netherlands knocks on your door, and they offer you to pay more, you can't sell to them. You have to sell your stuff to me. And because I'm your mom or I'm your dad, I'm going to get a good deal from you. And then after I get your raw stuff and I make stuff, I'm going to sell my stuff to you, and you have to buy it from me. Even if Spain knocks on your door and says, hey, I'll sell you shirts cheaper, you can't buy from Spain. So you exist pretty much for one reason. What's your whole existence about? Doing what? Yeah, your whole existence is about making me money. When I look at Ariel, I just see a dollar bill sign for the fact that she's sending raw materials and buying my finished materials. That's what mercantilism is. And if anyone is getting like the short end of the stick, who's getting the short end of this stick? The colonies, right? And that's why you're going to start thinking the colonies are going to be thinking about, man, rebellion and freedom might be a good idea. And that's why when you turn 18, some of you are going to move out as soon as possible. And the 13 colonies, when they're grown up, they're like, hey, we're actually ready to be independent. So what we'll write down here, it says that this is the belief, mercantilism's the belief that colonies exist for one purpose, to make their mother country rich. That's the only reason that you exist, to make your mother country rich. Furthermore, it says on the handout, colonies must sell their raw products. A raw product means it's just cotton. It's just furs. It's just whatever. It's like nothing has been done to it, right? You must sell your raw products only to the mother country. You must sell your raw products only to the mother country. And also, colonies must buy finished products only from their mother country. Colonies must buy finished products only from their mother country. So I have to give you my raw stuff, and I have to buy your finished stuff, and it's only with you. So that's a pretty good deal. Like, you're going to make a lot of money that way. And then it says also on the handout, the first country to start exploration, we're going to write down, was Portugal. Portugal's the first one. And Portugal, that makes sense that they're the first ones. You know, Portugal is going to be famous for like having this small ship. We talked about this small ship. They're called the caravel. And like that makes sense, right? Like we know about the caravel and all that kind of stuff. It's small, it's maneuverable. And there's two guys you should know by name who are explorers. And the first guy you should know is this guy named, in the blank, you write down his last name is Diaz, which you could write Dias or Diaz. Either way is okay. Probably the S is more authentic because Portuguese is similar to Spanish, but a lot of times instead of like a Z, you have an S at the end. So either way is fine, whether Diaz with a Z or with an S. And Diaz, he's famous because if you look at this map, he is all about sailing up and down the coast of Africa because they didn't know what Africa was like. They didn't know if you could go around it. And the most important thing that he found out, because they weren't sure, is the question is, can you sail around Africa? Because they didn't know, did Africa like go all the way to like the South Pole? If it does, there's no way to sail to Asia. So that's important. And you can see he actually makes it to the tip of South Africa. He says, wow, we can actually do this. We can get around it. And that was his whole mission, to do that. We'll write down that he sailed around the southern tip of Africa. There's a name for the southern tip of Africa. It's called the Cape of Good Hope. It's called the Cape of Good Hope. So that's like a really important development. He sails to the southern tip. It's called the Cape of Good Hope. But there's another guy that you should know by name. And this guy's name is Vasco da Gama. His name is on the slide on the screen. And Vasco da Gama, he's important because according to this map, where does he sail to? Where's he sail to? He gets to India, right? And if you look at this map, it kind of shows you how uncomfortable he was with this whole process. If you look at the map, Vasco da Gama, okay, he gets to the southern tip, and look what he's doing. He's kind of like hugging the coast. He's like, oh, I'm not sure what it looks like. Not sure. I don't want to get lost. But look what happens when he gets here. These cities, we've actually talked about this. What civilization is this on the east coast of Africa? These are the Swahili city-states. We've talked about the Swahili city-states, and look what happens. All of a sudden, he goes from, oh, I'm hugging the coast and I'm like super afraid, to going like 1,000 miles across the ocean. What did he come across here? What does he come across right here that allows him to go 1,000 miles across the ocean without fear, without worry? What trade route? What natural phenomenon is going all around here that makes this possible? Okay, the Indian Ocean Trade Network is there, but there's a natural phenomena that makes it super fast and super reliable. There's something called the monsoon wind patterns. And so that's what happens. So he gets all the way to India. The bummer is when he gets to India, he brings a bunch of products that the Indians kind of like scoff at. In fact, we're told he brought, like, you're going to India for like luxury goods, right? And if you're going to buy luxury goods, you probably need to like bring some good stuff. And like Vasco da Gama brought like pots made out of like tin. That's not like fancy stuff. It's like, here's a tin pot. And the Indians weren't very impressed. In fact, there's a story that says like the Indians looked what the white Europeans brought. They started like laughing at them. They're like, this is like a joke, right? So it says he sailed to India. Indians thought the Europeans brought nothing of value to trade. And the Portuguese would ultimately turn to, we'll write down, violence. They would turn to violence to force India to trade. They would turn to violence to force India to trade. And that's sadly the solution that they would take. They would turn to violence to force the Indians to trade. Yeah, so that's not great, but that is what they did. And when the Portuguese do that, they end up when the Portuguese do that, they decide that we're gonna force this entire area to trade with us. In fact, it says on your handout the Portuguese would conquer coastal cities. They would conquer coastal cities along the Indian Ocean. That's what they would do. They would conquer coastal cities all along the Indian Ocean. And so you can see like on the map on the screen, there's like all these little red dots. Those are all parts of the world that the Portuguese took over. It says the Portuguese, They would conquer these coastal cities, and these forts on the map on the screen, they gave Portugal a global, and we're going to write down this phrase, a trading post empire. Because what you have is you have all these little dots on the screen, all these little red dots on the map. These are all cities that the Portuguese took over. Now, the Portuguese can't take over a lot of land because Portugal's not that big. Portugal's that little green dot or that green strip of land in Europe. So they're not big anyway, but they can because they have what new technology that makes it easier to kill people? They have cannons and they have guns. So they basically tell people, trade with us. Oh, you don't want to? Then we're going to kill you. And if you do that enough, you can actually take over parts of the world. That's not good, but that is what they did. And it says the Portuguese also, you'll write down in the next blank, restricted Indian Ocean trade. The Portuguese restricted Indian Ocean trade to those who were willing to, you'll write down, buy permits. To buy a permit. What that means is that the Portuguese, for the very first time, they looked at the Indian Ocean and they said, the Indian Ocean is our private property. They said, we actually own the entire Indian Ocean. No one had ever done anything like that before, because before this, there was something called the Indian Ocean Trade Network. People had been trading in peace in the Indian Ocean for like 1,000 years. There was like never a war in the Indian Ocean. But now the Portuguese have guns. And the Portuguese have cannons. And the Portuguese say everything in the Indian Ocean is our property. And if you want to be in our property, you have to pay for it. That's like a gutsy move for a teeny tiny country on the other side of the world to make. But that is what they do. In fact, it says on your handout, the Portuguese would eventually violently claim the Indian Ocean. They said the Indian Ocean was their property. So that's like a big deal. That's a big change for sure. Yeah. Yes, as soon as she gets back, sorry. So a couple things I want to talk about. You might remember that there had been other people in the Indian Ocean before. In fact, there was this guy from China. He went all the way to Africa. He brought back giraffes. He was actually a Muslim from the Ming Dynasty. And he was famous. We actually looked at this picture. He had those are his ships in the back. He had 40 of those big ones. That little thing is Chris Columbus's ship. What's that guy's name? That's Zheng He. And his name is there on this map. We'll write down in the 1430s, much of the trade in China had been part of trade and travel under the leadership of the Muslim Admiral Zheng He. We'll write down his name. But you might remember that his voyages didn't last forever. And in fact, you might remember that the Chinese decided this was like too expensive. It was like a waste of money. We're just like hanging out with barbarians. That's not even worth our time. The Chinese saw these voyages as a waste of money, and we'll write down, they turned inward. They turned inward. They're like, you know what? We're just going to focus on ourselves. We're not going to worry about dealing with outsiders. But that didn't save China, because the Portuguese, well, they came to them. It doesn't save China because the Portuguese come to them. So China is going to be visited by the Portuguese. You know, the Portuguese have all these little green dots everywhere, and they're going to make it there. It says on the handout, by 1514, the first Europeans came to China. It was Portugal. So the Portuguese make it to China. So 1514, the first Europeans to China was Portugal. And though Portugal had been able to take over coastal cities in India, they could not take over parts of China. They don't have that same kind of success. But when they get to China, they also bring missionaries with them. And what group of missionaries are going to bring? They're the smartest. They're the best. They learn local languages everywhere they go because they're so stinking smart. They're the Jesuits. We're going to write down, they came to China, the Jesuits. That's spelled Jesuits. Jesuits. They're like the super smart Catholic missionaries. In fact, there's one Jesuit you should know by name. I'll say his name and then spell his name. His name is Matteo Ricci. Matteo is Matteo, Matteo. And Ricci is Ricci. Ricci. He was an Italian Jesuit. And actually, he was so well educated, he was hired by none other than who hires the Jesuits that's like super high up? The emperor, right? Like the emperor himself. And that's a big deal because remember, in general, the Chinese thought really poorly of non-Chinese. If the emperor himself's willing to hire you, it kind of shows you like how smart you are. And that's what the Jesuits were. It says the Portuguese would actually also reach Japan. We saw a movie about that. There's a movie with Adam Driver and Andrew Garfield called Silence. I think we watched clips from that movie. And it says that those types of missionaries that made it to Japan, they were also the Jesuits. So where it says 1649, it's the Jesuits in Japan too. There was a problem though, because they were so successful. It says they were eventually outlawed and persecuted. We saw a video clip of the Christians. What did they do to the Christians to kill them? They crucified them, right? Like said, oh, you like Jesus so much? How about you die like him? And they crucified Japanese Christians. We saw a video of that. Well, they were persecuted, especially because thousands of lower class Japanese converted. Thousands of lower class Japanese converted. And that kind of freaks out the Japanese government because they're like, whoa, these white people came out of nowhere and now our poor people are following this religion who says a guy says he's the king of kings. That's kind of scary stuff. In fact, Christianity was seen, you'll write down, as a threat. Christianity was seen as a threat. On the backside, and the last thing to write down, you now have Portugal with all these dots. They don't have like a lot of land, but they have dots all around the world. And that's cool for a while. But it says on the handout, because of Portugal's small size, they would be in competition with the rest of Western Europe. They're not going to be able to hold on to all these dots. There's going to be two other people, also European, who are going to rise in power and take some, but not all these dots away from them. The two will be, of course, who's like the rival that gets super powerful with a great navy? England. And the second group of people you'll write down are the Dutch, a group of people we've not talked about yet, but we'll talk about soon. Okay, with that, we are done, and we are going to have said we are done with lesson 4.2. We talked today about the importance of exploration, causes, and events.